Assalamualaikum everybody, and a very warm welcome to you on behalf of VLA Virtual Legal Advisory. You already know me, but we have an esteemed guest speaker today with us. Please welcome Sana Khan, who is a law lecturer at the University of Karachi. Sana, thank you so much for being with us today.
You're welcome.
Now, Sana, everybody knows that there was a historic ruling yesterday by the International Court of Justice in the case of South Africa versus Israel. And it has become extremely pertinent to actually discuss this ruling. All the channels are, there are so many politicians, intellectuals who are all going through this. And I think that it's very important to actually shed some light on this for the sake of the audience, and especially for those who are lay persons who may not possess that much knowledge about laws in general or about international human rights laws, etc. And this is the purpose of this webinar, the topic, of course, being genocide or not. So just very quickly, I would actually like to start by saying something to South Africa. And if, hopefully once this goes online on YouTube and other social media platforms, I'd like them, to hear this from us firsthand, that you have my profoundest and sincerest gratitude for initiating these legal proceedings. South Africa as a country has done what no other nation dared to do. They have truly followed the true essence and the true spirit and the true legacy of Nelson Mandela. I'd also like to actually add a quote over here by Nelson Mandela, which actually resonates a lot with this current case. I hate racial discrimination most intensely and all its manifestations. I have fought all my life. I fight now and will do so until the end of my days. I mean, normally it's this sort of rhetoric versus reality, but in South Africa's case, we have actually seen that the legacy of Nelson Mandela and whatever he left behind was not just rhetoric, it was actually implemented in reality. So, South Africa, I salute you for your humanity. Thank you. All right. Now, just moving on, Sana, so obviously before we start discussing this topic about the judgment itself, I just want to put a context. Now, yesterday, the 27th of January, was the Holocaust Memorial Day. And for those who may not be aware of this, this particular date marks the anniversary of the liberation of the Nazi concentration camp of Auschwitz. And this was back in 1945. And those who may not be aware of it, 6 to 7 million Jews were murdered during the Holocaust, which happens to be one of the greatest genocides in history. In fact, the word genocide itself was coined by the Polish Jewish lawyer Raphael Lemkin. And this particular day is sort of commemorated because it's a reminder of these ills or these evils that exist in the world. And when I say evils, we're talking about things like racism, anti-Semitism, Islamophobia, and all other types of intolerance. Now, it's actually very interesting to know that in the context of the Holocaust Memorial Day and all the tragedy that has been unfolding in Gaza since the last couple of months before our very own eyes, this judgment has come quite swiftly, I would say, and I think that that is a positive. Sana, before we move on to that, I just want to very quickly summarize the judgment. So there were 17 judges, and I'm just going to go through the orders just one by one. So Israel shall take all measures within its power to prevent genocidal acts against Palestinians. Israel will ensure that its army does not commit any genocidal acts. Israel will prevent and punish public incitement to commit genocide against Palestinians. The references to phrases like human animals, which was used by the Israeli president, and other degrading references as well. Israel will ensure the provision of urgent services and humanitarian aid to Gaza. Israel will ensure the preservation of evidence related to allegations of genocide. And Israel will submit a report to the court in a month's time showing its compliance with these orders. Now, Sana, I'd like to actually start by asking you a question. Let's look at the demerits or the negatives in a moment. Let's first start with looking at the merits of this particular judgment. What, in your opinion, are the merits?
Yeah, so Bismillah Rahmanir Rahim. First of all, thank you so much, Sana, for giving me this opportunity to talk about that historical judgment that we all have witnessed. And so the positives of that judgment is that, it just because since 7th October, we have been seeing the bombardment. But, everybody has their own narrative. So this has actually solidifies the Palestinian cause in general, because it's very important to talk about the issue and to talk about in an issue that has a proper language. And now everybody has a proper language that it is a genocide that is happening there, because because sometimes the conversation can be misleading that it all started because Hamas attacked, which is a non-state actors. So ultimately it is for the benefit of the Palestinian people actually, that they have been suffering. It is not related to Gaza only, it is related to the Ramallah, the West Bank as well. And you can see that the war is expanding, and the war is actually a regional issue and has been, the people of Palestine have been suffering for the longest time since 1917, the Balfour Declaration. So I think this has shaped the narrative in a right way. So this is, I think, the best part of that judgment, that it has given us the language through which we can, further shape the narrative, and obviously then and then talk about ceasefire and talk about the solutions, because if you read additional opinions in the judgment, that talks about that it is a political issue as well. So whenever the best legal minds come together and talk about an issue, they obviously talk in a very sensible way. So I think this is the best part of this judgment. Obviously it has not changed the situation on ground. Today in all news channels we have seen that the devastation has been going on. So the words don't change the fate, but yes, the narrative does. And obviously, the kind of pressure that the judgment will have an impact on the Palestinian situation. So that's the positive side of the judgment. And it will not change much reality on the ground, but it will definitely shape that you can take that judgment to the Security Council, to the General Assembly, and to other, for example, Organization of Islamic Countries, that they can do some legislation that how to counter Israeli narrative. For example, this judgment can also shape, for example, how to campaign on BDS, that is the boycott, divestment, and sanction campaign that has been going on almost in all Muslim countries and like-minded countries that support Palestine. So I think this is step in a right direction, but this is just a first step, and obviously not a first, but it is, you can say it's a continuation of the international bodies that have been talking about the Palestine issue. So it just consolidate and collectively uh, help in shaping the narrative about the Palestinian cause.
That was brilliant, Sana. Thank you so much. I think that you're absolutely right, Sana. I think that what this historic judgment has done is, firstly, of course, it sets a precedent. And the precedent is that something that is both morally and legally wrong and ethically is wrong. And I think that you're absolutely right. They have sort of, solidified this particular argument. They've entrenched it now in the form of a judgment, because this has been going on for what, 70 plus years. The crisis in Gaza, and to date we did not have this sort of a judgment. So I think in that context, it is something that obviously presents itself as a landmark. It goes to show that there are some crimes against humanity, because this is what it is, are completely unacceptable. And the one thing, and obviously we'll come to that when I continue with the questions, is that despite the fact that, and at this juncture, in fact, I would also like to I am absolutely heartbroken with the number of people who have died in Gaza, and there are about 26,000 people who have died. I was just seeing a statistic that around 70% of those have been women and children, and there are just so many problems over there that women are encountering, as well as children and the elderly, and we've seen a lot of that, which I'm not going to go into. Having said that, Hamas being the aggressors, invading Israel, killing around 1,200 people, I am equally heartbroken for those families who lost, who've lost loved ones, and also the lives of those hostages which are at stake, which have been at stake throughout this period. Now, uh, coming back to this line of reasoning, we've seen the positives in the judgment. We've seen that it has actually, it poses as a great victory, if you like, for Palestinians or anybody who might be oppressed. But there has not been a clear mention of a ceasefire. What do you make of that, Sana?
Well, that I have been very curious about that, and obviously, because in international law is so vast, and people have different kind of analogies when it comes to international law and the implementation of international law. But in my understanding, when I see the chronology of the cases that ask for the provisional measures, whether it is the Myanmar versus Gambia case or the Russia versus Ukraine case, that has the same allegation of genocide convention. So during my study, I find out that the court in the Russia versus Ukraine case ordered for an immediate ceasefire to the war. And I wonder, because in the para 61 of the order, which came on the 27th of January, has give the reference of that case, but does not give a ceasefire order. I don't know why the court has these double standards, because when I was doing my research, I read the judgment, the order of Judge Nolt, who's from Germany. In my understanding of that order, I find out that it automatically invokes when the court says that that the violation of genocide convention has been happening, plausibly happening. So ultimately, what it means that you have to stop the war, and that means that you have to go for the immediate ceasefire. I wonder why, in this case particularly, that is the first request of the South Africa, that there has to be an immediate ceasefire. The court has not given that, and in that you talked about it's a swift decision. It's about 2 weeks, and the Russia versus Ukraine decision, the court give provisional orders in 3 weeks. So, and this is such a long time dispute, and the court ICG has been dealing with the Palestinian issue for the longest time. There's a advisory opinion on the reconstruction of the wall, in which Israel was considered as an exploiter of the Palestinian territory. So I think that the court has taken a very lenient approach, and obviously the court has greatly emphasized on the word plausible, which means likely reasonable. And when I was doing my research, I find out the dissenting opinion of the Brazilian judge. His name is Trinidad something, sorry, I'm mistaken, he's no more alive. And in his separate opinion in the Gambia versus Myanmar case, he mentioned about that plausible word is actually weakening the cause of the genocide, because it has to be a fundamental it has to be a fundamental finding of the court that the genocide is happening, so it has to be stopped. So he talked, it was a 29-page opinion, and he conclusively talked about that how, when we say that it's plausible that the genocide is happening, because of the plausibility, actually you undermine the genocide that is happening. And he emphasized in the court that how the whole history of the human rights law and the genocide convention has been there to protect the vulnerable people. But what we have seen, that the court is more into the intricacies, that whether it's a state actor, because still now only the subject of international law is state. And we see in this case that the Palestine is not a state, it's a ethnic group, so their statehood is not yet determined. They have a de facto statehood status, not the de jure status. So legally, they are not the state. So here, I think the court has gone into that distinction, that whether it's a state or a group, and that's why the court did not order the ceasefire, which is we wanted, because otherwise the genocide, you have to be cautious that genocide is not happening as decided in the order. And I think it is a very negative side of that judgment, and the court should be more vigilant. And in one of the opinion that I read, it's by Justice Bhandari of India. he in his order mentioned that there has to be an immediate halt of the war by both the parties, so that the people, as you mentioned, the women, children who are suffering, will have some remedy. Otherwise, their condition is just the same. And the judge, Trinidad of Brazil, actually mentioned about the vulnerability of the human being that are in the armed conflict, unfortunately. So I think it's high time that international law has to think beyond the traditional concept of state. We are living in a digital world. This genocide is happening in front of our eyes. It's in a phone. So are we getting numb about it? And the court is still using, trying to cure cancer from Panadol. So unfortunately, this has been the weakest part of that judgment. And if the court would have, been clearer in its order that there has to be an immediate halt, I think this will send a different message to this crisis that is happening in the world.
Absolutely, Sana, brilliantly expressed. I think it goes back to this whole thing about Hamas being the aggressors in this scenario. And of course, we know, if we're talking about politics, we do know that where does Britain and America stand? We know exactly where they stand, where their support is. And this is where I feel that on the one hand, this is a beautiful decision. Again, it reflects the true essence of why this particular International Court of Justice was created, to bring about just outcomes. But then on the other hand, you have this sort of diplomatic, political reasoning as well. And you mentioned two judgments. You mentioned the Ukraine and Russia case and the Gambia and Myanmar case. And obviously, in the Russia case, the decision was completely against Russia and in favor of completely putting a stop to the military action. So when we say that the judgment of the South African Israel case reflects to a large degree the Gambian Myanmar case, do you think, and when we talk about potential double standards, we're not saying that the ICJ have double standards, but because of a few inadequacies in this judgment, fundamental inadequacies, I should say, we feel that perhaps, do you think that they have demonstrated some form of racism over here?
Well, accusing ICJ of racism, I don't think it's an appropriate language. But ICJ previously has decided against United States of America in Nicaragua versus United States of America case. So I don't think that accusing ICJ of racism is right, because the bench is very multi state. There is a judge of Somalia, Uganda, and so many other countries. I think it's quite multipolar bench that we have. I don't know it's the right word, multipolar, but yeah, so many different judges have been sitting there. But no, it's not about racism. I think it's about obviously the judges who have gone to the ICJ. They come from their countries. That's the requirement of judges, that they have to be the highest standard of judges who in the country, and then they go to International Court of Justice and represent there as judges, not as their countries. But obviously we have been this is a criticism that comes to the ICJ, but I think we have to be very careful of using the word racist to the bench, because it is very respectful, and I think we have great hopes that ICG will do the justice, though it will take longer. And but these are the order is there, which will remain in history. And people will read that what does the ICJ do, to stop the suffering of people. So I think the court jurisprudence, it's a very young court. It's only 75 years or 70 years of history. So the jurisprudence is developing in international law. And this is like Marty Koskemeni. He's a famous international lawyer. He talks about the fragmentation, or the other word that he used is the indeterminacy of international law. So these are the problems of international law. These are the fault lines of international law. And international law is represented by states, basically. So states are the one who shapes international law. So the global world order and the hegemonic power like United States of America has a lot of domination in international law. But previously, as I mentioned in the Nicaragua versus USA case, it was decided against the United States of America. So I think there is a ray of hope that the court will. Russia is a big power, but you have seen that they have given decision against Russia as well. So I think we have to be hopeful with the ICJ, and that's where is the hope is. Otherwise, there is no international world order actually. But yes, we have to be critical. We have to know the language of the law and how it can be manipulated. Obviously, there are judges who represent their state and they have that mindset that reflect in those judgments. But criticism and reading these judgments and the way we are talking, I think, about this judgment is a way forward, so that the debate is not only from the global north but from the global south as well, that they also have their perspective. And there's a whole school of thought that is developing now in international law, that is the school of thought of Tual, that is the third world perspective of international law. That the because as you mentioned that international law is very hegemonic, and the world, the dominant power shapes the narrative. So there has been a school of thought that that questions that hegemonism in international law.
Sana, so when I spoke of the racist element, so when we looked at the Myanmar case, for example, again, we were talking about a marginalized Islamic community. And then we're talking about Gaza, again, a community that has been oppressed for decades and decades now. And then obviously, I mean, you rightly talk about the American case as well. But of course, when we look at the Ukraine versus Russia case, which has so many similarities with Israel and Gaza, it just makes you wonder, why would you provide a completely different judgment in one case, and because and a completely different judgment in another. And I think when I sort of dissect this question, the first country or the first thing that pops up is America. And obviously Russia is a superpower, we all know that, but at the end of the day Russia does not rule the world. And I'm not even going to shy away from this. I'm bold enough to actually say this. I have a lot of respect for all countries. I have a lot of respect for the UK because that's where I live for the bulk of my life. And to a large degree, I have a lot of respect for America as well. But I won't shy away from the fact that in sort of, being complicit with what Israel has been doing in Gaza, they have, both Britain and America have aided and abetted a genocide. That's effectively what they're doing. All right, I'm just going to just go ahead, Sana, because I think that we have a few time constraints. And of course, this is such a wide topic that we could just keep going on. So let me just move on and let me just ask you, Sana, that you spoke of the different judges and you spoke of the entire bench, and I did read through some of the opinions, and you're absolutely right that it shows a diversity, and some of their opinions were really strong. But if we can focus on the dissenting opinions, and if you can very quickly just tell the audience about the two judges who provided the dissenting opinions, where do they come from? What did they say? And if you could just shed some light on why do you think they said that very quickly. Thank you.
Well, the two dissenting opinion in this order is one is from the Uganda judge. I'm sorry, I can't pronounce her name rightly, but and the other is Judge Aaron Barak, who is the actually the ICJ allows the countries who are the state parties to allow them to sit one judge from their country to sit at the bench, right? So this provision is for everyone, for every country who are contesting at the ICJ. So Judge Batumi, I think her name is, sorry if I'm mispronouncing her.
Julia, I think
Actually,
Julia
she has a
something,
very
but yeah.
different take on this issue. Yeah, but let's not go there because pronunciations are hard. Actually, her point of view is that it is not a legal opinion. It's not a legal dispute. It's a political dispute. So she said instead of coming to the court, you should solve it within the light of the UN Security Council resolutions on this issue. So that's her basic argument is, and obviously in very in times when people emotions are very high, So, her position that she's not accepting that there's a plausible chance that Israel is doing the genocide. It's very discomforting. It's very irritating. But it is said in the jurisprudence that, dissent are the voices of the future. So that's my take on that. So she has her own respectable opinion. And obviously, Judge Barak is an ad hoc judge at the ICJ, and he was representing the Israeli perspective, though they have to be impartial. But I think in one of the two order that the ICJ did, he supported the Palestinian cause and supported the South Africa request. So I think that is what we expect from them. And that is but Barak was mentioning in the order that Israel was very compliant with the humanitarian laws, and it is always in their backpack, whenever they are going to the war. So I think if he's saying that, I think we have to be very critical of what he wrote, because that's not we have seen. Because all the pictures of the destruction is not coming from Israel, it's not coming from Tel Aviv or the Jericho. Unfortunately, it is coming from the Gaza, and it's just a 40 kilometer. It is called as the most congested place on earth. So I mean, if the Israeli defense forces are that moral and that uh, compliant with international humanitarian law, I wonder whether these pictures are fake then. So I think it is very I take it with a very not happy with that what he wrote, because that is very irritating for me to know that, because we are seeing that the genocide and the destruction is very much in front of our eyes. And the South African lawyer Adela, I think, she said that we have failed in Rwanda, we have failed in Bosnia, we have failed in Serbia, we have failed in Myanmar. So when it will stop? When the multilateralism is losing its ground, because people are not seeing the result. We are like, still, I want to be very hopeful that this judgment will see implementation as well. But we have seen the jurisprudence, as you were rightly pointed out, that there is a United States hegemony, unfortunately, and we see international law in a unipolar world, and where we see United States as a hegemon. So, in that perspective, I think these two dissenting opinion are very disturbing, though they have their own reasoning, as the judges should be allowed to use, their reason, and that's why they're there for. But yes, they are very disturbing in terms of the allegation on Israel is, that is the allegation of genocide, which is the highest crime, and it is called as the erga omnes partes that has been used in the judgment. That is an obligation for all. This term is specifically used for crime against humanity, genocide, and torture. So, in that, her dissenting note has substance, but it is very disturbing, unfortunately, because the kind of allegation is on Israel are very severe. So I think the judges has also need to be careful that what positions they are taking. Does that favor Israel in the long run? Because the judgment has some kind of things that she talks about in the judgment. So I think that is very disturbing, obviously. Thank you.
Thanks, Sana. Um, when I actually read that, it was a very brief dissenting opinion. The focus was on this being a political matter, and the first thing that popped into my head was, is murder, a murder that takes place anywhere in any jurisdiction, is that a political matter or a legal matter? And then I thought, why was your court created in the first place? So I thought this is a very illogical argument that is used, which is perhaps used to cover the real reason of, her dissenting opinion, whatever the real reason might be, which obviously I won't get into because I don't know much about this judge myself. But again, Sana, thank you so much for, for explaining all of that, because again, for the layperson, they wouldn't even have known that they were dissenting judges and why did they give their opinions. And just to add to what you said, the Israeli judge voted in favor of humanitarian aid being given to the people of Gaza, and also the prohibition to stop the incitement to I think the derogatory names and incitement to violence. So, Sana, just because we've got a couple of minutes left, I'm just going to say a few concluding things, and I'm going to say to everybody, um, please don't stop with the protests, the social media um, posts and whatever else that we are doing in our own individual capacities. I mean, doing something wrong is one thing, and then not standing up for it, of course, is wrong as well, because we don't want to be aiding and abetting in something that has been so gruesome. Please continue to write letters to international organizations, or or within our own country as well, to official organizations. I would also urge people to actually write directly to the International Court, to the International Criminal Court. I wrote to them, and I think that it is high time that the International Criminal Court brought charges against Mr. Netanyahu and his administration as well. I think that after this ICJ judgment, we need to see that happen as well. Um, I'd also like to say to all the campaigners, journalists, and human rights groups out there within Pakistan and beyond, because we're addressing the entire world. Please, please continue with all of this, because I think that we, or the people of Gaza, could not have gotten so far if it hadn't been for the pressure that came from the entire world. And Sana, you're absolutely right. This is a digital world. We're seeing something unfolding before our eyes. So it is everyone's moral duty to interfere and to say something. I'm just going to say one last thing, and then, Son, I'm going to ask you to conclude this. George Orwell wrote a beautiful novel called Animal Farm, which was about the Russian Revolution. I would encourage everybody to actually, go ahead and read that. And a lot of it actually reflects the fact that, when you are oppressed, your thinking is different. But once you are in a position of authority, you then become the oppressors. And I'm just going to add two quotes over here. All animals are equal, but some animals are more equal than others. And this is a direct quote from the book. Not going to explain what that means, but self explanatory. 12 voices were shouting in anger, and they were all alike. No question now what had happened to the faces of the pigs. The creatures outside looked from pig to man, and from man to pig, and from pig to man again. But already it was impossible to say which was which. So I think that that's self explanatory. I am going to pause over there, and Sana, I'd like to thank you with all my heart for taking out the time, for being such a great human rights defender. And would you like to say a few things before the session ends?
No, I think just when you know better, you do better. So I think this is the time that with the help of the digital technologies, we have a lot of material to read on international law and what's happening at the court. So I think be vigilant, know what's happening, and see how you can contribute. Because now in a digital age, we can, do a lot by sitting at our home. We can put pressure on Israel. I think